The big bad of the Cold War was the US, right? The US has gulags to this day. They had them fight fires in LA recently. Only ones to use nukes, funded and helped terrorists in multiple countries, had their secret police, FBI, doing a lot of shady stuff trying to stop the civil rights movement. Also example of an extreme left social change, which I believe benefited the Americans. I'm currently reading a book called The War of Nerves by Martin Sixsmith, a psychologist, with the help of his son Daniel Sixsmith, a historian. It's a great book if you'd like to be up to date with nearly all the events of the Cold War and to immerse yourself in the mindsets of the leaders of the time. What it also does great is explain to some extent the reason why recent events are happening. With this in mind, I could just point the commenter to the book, but there's no fun in that, is there? Hey, I'm Thomas. The comment was hinting at this. There is in no way, shape or form any chance for anyone to argue with anyone that there wasn't a clear bad guy. What is my reasoning to say something like this? I will try to explain my reasoning by using a point system, which of course is biased to a degree because this is my channel, hello, but I will try to cover every phenomenon, event or decision that I found that would be deemed morally questionable. If the US or the USSR performed a questionable task, they get a point. Before we start, I'd like to explain the most common logical fallacy that you encounter while debating this topic, tu quoque fallacy. The commenter used it as well. One argument used to deem the Soviets as the big bad is the use of forced labor or gulags. The commenter counters this with saying the US also has gulags, which is questionable. Anyway, they didn't counter anything with this argument. They tried to call out my hypocrisy, somehow without any evidence, but my argument still stands even if he had any. The one thing I really hate about logical fallacies is that the people who are influenced by them don't care. To quote, who cares? I can't even spell that. So to prove a point in a different way, I will do this. If both sides exhibit a trait that could be deemed morally questionable, neglecting the fact of scale of these actions, as I will mention, neither get a point. So, was the USSR actually the big bad? The name itself, translated straight from the Russian language, roughly means Main Directorate of Correctional Labor Camps. There is no hiding behind the definitions and interpretations. Ivan Yebil, I don't like you. To Siberia you go, pizdet. The commenter has rather interestingly hinted at the LA fires. I have no idea what you're saying. Do you mean the firefighters? The trained men and women tasked with putting out the catastrophic disaster that may or may not have been caused by direct human involvement? How is this remotely close to a forced labor camp? What? Okay, I hope I'm misunderstanding a poorly written comment. Let's give it another try. Modern US prison system. Wow, what a topic. Yes, you could make the argument that the US history regarding the incarceration of people performing the pettiest crimes, like the possession of the bomb Bucklat plant, seems dystopian as hell. I agree. Does the US prison system host politicians that spoke their mind? Do they also make them do forced labor in very harsh conditions, maybe eventually working them to death? February 1950. The Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy sketched an image for the American citizens that has birthed an entire movement called McCarthyism. He declared that the rise of communism and authoritarian states in the world are caused not by their superiority, but by the own fault of the US. The system and the people are supposedly corrupted from within. The Red Scare, or the witch hunts, were a real thing again. The focus was mainly on education and the building of healthy American patriotism, void of any inferior Eastern Hemisphere thinking. Anyone could be portrayed as the enemy of the state and be put on trial with minimal proof. Now, what people tend to not talk about at all concerning McCarthy is that he was a raging alcoholic that has seized the perfect moment to cause mass panic, maybe also induced by his own panic, to launch his own campaign, which has lasted for about 4 years, until 1954, when the Army's chief attorney Joseph Welch turned on him, and then he died of hepatitis in 1957, and the witch hunts ceased since then. The results of the Red Scare were the loss of jobs for about 10 or 12,000 people and a few hundred imprisoned. Here are the numbers to compare with gulags. And for the Quoque people, it was jail, not a forced labor camp. In the US during the Cold War era, there is absolutely nothing to compare it to gulags. Nothing. 0-1 for the Soviets. Round 2. USA used nukes, the Soviets didn't. Do you see what I see? Is that an asterisk? That's right, the Soviets didn't use nukes at the time when the US did. Because when they were involved in an actual war, they didn't have nukes. That's right. But no, seriously, the use of nukes by the US against the Japanese were a heavily debated topic, and even when it came to the Korean War, General MacArthur had to kick the bucket because he was so trigger happy with the use of nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula. But I will fulfill my promise and continue using flawed logic. The score is 1-1. Completely ignoring the fact that during the time both of powers had nuclear weapons, none of them used them, and also the fact that without the cataclysmic and frankly terrible effects the atomic bombs had on the Japanese cities, the war would just get protracted and might have possibly resulted in the deaths of many more allies or Japanese. To use them was bad, to not use them possibly worse. Round 3. The before mentioned Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Laos and Cambodian civil wars, the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, Iran, Afghanistan, all influenced by the military aid of the US. Now, to use the same weapon against this argument, Korean War, just the other side, Hungarian Uprising, Czechoslovak Prague Spring, Vietnam War, just the other side, Civil War in Angola, Civil War in Mozambique, Soviet-Afghan War, all influenced by the military aid of the Soviets. Most of these conflicts were proxy wars, where the world powers do not clash directly but back their own respective regimes of the countries, some regimes being barely democratic or even humane, if I dare say so, which just proves the point in both cases that they were really not for the benefit of the mankind. Both had the same goal, just switched. Both used the same measures, both are accused of horrible and immoral practices. The score is 1-1. Round 4. One of my older videos explores the idea that the Soviet Union wasn't really a state with socialist economic policies. That's because, in my opinion, it was barely a state. I don't really recognize the Cold War as a conflict of competing ideologies, since it isn't very far-fetched to say that both of these are flawed in one way or another and have caused suffering in the world among different classes and cultures of people. If it were only based on that, it would have been like deciding between a piece of moldy white bread and a piece of moldy rye bread. No, this was a conflict between superpowers, with a facade of defending against impending doom that would have come if the opponent came out victorious. In this video, with this topic, I am talking about nations, one that has had its democratic principles written down 200 years prior like some sort of a cheat sheet to not accidentally become dictatorial, and the other had no f***ing idea what to do after the head of state, that has been in power for 30 years, died. Free elections? Sure. Freedom of movement? Yup. Minority rights? Minority rights. Oh. So this is the argument. Sure, the USSR has been mistreating its Jewish population, enemies of the state, reformists in other countries, artists, scientists, politicians, the entire population of Ukraine, then and now, but the US Jim Crow laws that mandated the segregation of colored people and limited them in almost every aspect of everyday life. Also, let's not mention the CIA's project MKUltra, which secretly conducted human experimentation using psychological and physical torture in order to prove the phenomenon brainwashing is real and to prove that it was actively being used by the Soviets and the Chinese. A project that no one from the public knew about? In the democratic bastion that is the US? Oh, my quoque fallacy is telling me that these two instances completely negate the violations of numerous laws against humanity committed by the Soviets, so the score is still 1-1. Round 5. I'm not being serious, I'm just trying to show that it's never completely black and white. Oh, well that's stupid. See, you clicked on this video for some reasons, I'm certain. Maybe you're a tanky that's trying to cope with a completely wrong and skewed view of the world. If so, go read the book. Maybe you just wanted to learn more about the conflict. And maybe, just maybe, you're a coagulated, vile, smelly, disgusting ball of actually basement dweller, and you sacrifice your own moral compass that has been shaped by your values and convictions your whole life just in order to sound smart on the internet. What is the point of learning anything if all you can do at the end of the day is to say, meh, it depends? How can anyone in good faith and healthy mind compare the two completely different nations with separate goals, means, and ambitions, where, as it is usually in history, nothing has any sort of axiomatic explanation, and the imaginary black swan that creeps its way onto the world scene every now and then changes everything? And then proclaim, hey bro, you don't actually get it. They were the good guys, you're just looking at it wrong. What is the point? You actually see this everywhere on YouTube. The Crusades were awesome. Islam is actually bad. Judaism isn't what you think. J.D. Vance is a bigot. J.D. Vance is based. The US is turning fascist. The EU is turning leftist. You have opinions, facts, misinformation, or any other means to portray a message absolutely everywhere. And the beautiful thing about this is that there is the correct one. There is that one that is 100% factual and should be upheld as the statement that sets the foundation for the next discussion or course of action. If I had to choose between a delusional tanky defending the literal violation of human rights and a hillbilly that has never seen a person with a different skin tone and he doesn't even want to, I'd have a tough time choosing. But if you presented me with a choice between them or the guy that said, oh well, not everything is black and white, the stuff is a lot more complicated than you think, I knew that, I read a full paragraph on Wikipedia and I don't actually know what to think anymore. I'd cross-dress it, I'd be drinking moonshine with my ushanka on. Nothing gets ever done if you're in a state of limbo like this. If you cannot even tell the difference between red and blue, big and small, day and night, don't go around telling shit to people that can. It's never completely black and white, you know. Then help me f***ing solve this with an actual argument! I'm going to end on a good note. However scary were the scenarios of the Cold War, and almost scarily similar recent events, the humanity of both superpowers was just dripping through their masks. My favorite example is from the mentioned book The War of Nerves. A brief conversation between Nikita Khrushchev and the British ambassador to Moscow, James Roberts, 2 days before the construction of the Berlin Wall, at a drinks reception in Moscow. You know, we sent a new Soviet military commander to Berlin. Roberts followed with silence. Well, if you take it like that, let me just tell you that I can destroy your country with 8 of our nuclear bombs. I think that would be a mistake. You know, we're rather small country. I think 6 would be enough. But don't forget the RAF can come and bomb Moscow and about 19 other cities and destroy them. And that wouldn't be very good either, would it? Well, maybe you're right. Let's have a drink.